A hostel is a kind of inexpensive, short-term accommodation where visitors share a dorm with other travelers. The rooms are often designed to accommodate as many people as possible, and the beds are typically bunk beds, in order to provide hotels and Airbnbs a more economical option. These accommodations are a popular alternative for single people who don't want to spend a lot of money on housing, or for those who only want to stay for the night and not spend much time there. They may be single or mixed gender and have private or shared restrooms. The tales you will hear are from independent travelers who stayed in hostels and had bad experiences with the people they stayed with. After my breakup, I spoke to a French woman I met on a dating app for a while. After a period of messaging and then phoning and FaceTiming almost every night, we really clicked. When I offered that we visit, she made it obvious that she couldn't accommodate me since she still lived with her strict family. In addition, I inquired whether she would be open to sharing a hotel room. I was just 23 and didn't have a lot of money, so she said she didn't want to spend the first few nights after we met because her parents would flip out. Since I knew I wouldn't be able to sleep on a plane, I downloaded a few movies to watch during the 7-hour flight and booked a room at a hostel near her in Paris. When I tried to sleep, I was right. I had hardly slept for the last 24 hours by the time I arrived and grabbed an Uber to the accommodation since I wasn't even near. I was tired from the 6-hour time difference, and since it was around 3 in the morning, I could at least simply collapse in the hostel bed and not have to deal with jet lag the next day. I went to my room after arriving at the hostel, which was, to be honest, not the most lovely place ever. I had to give him some tolerance since it was 3 a.m. Even if it was small, the lobby smelled strange, and the front desk employee wasn't really thrilled about his job. The room where I would be sleeping had 6 beds, 5 of which were vacant, but one of them had a guy seated on it, typing on his laptop. He glanced up at me before turning back to his laptop. "Hey," I murmured, but he didn't respond. He seemed preoccupied with his job, so I laid down on one of the vacant beds and asked him while the light was still on in the room. He gave me a blank look but said nothing when I inquired whether it was okay that I had switched off the light. I thought he hadn't heard me, so I said it again, and he gave me a weird smile as he nodded his head. Then I stood up and turned out the lights in the room. I dropped off easily since I hadn't had enough sleep, but I was surprised to wake up a few hours later. I had no idea what had awakened me up, but the room was still black. Even though it was almost entirely black, I could see that every bed was unoccupied as I turned over to my site and surveyed the room. It was 5 in the morning when I checked my phone, so I knew that something had to have awakened me up, even though I also observed that the 2 bunk beds next to mine were completely vacant. Because I wanted to sleep, I laid back on my side and closed my eyes. Fuck it. He probably left, and maybe a sound from out in the hall woke me up. Before the bed started to shake and I heard a little break of the metal frame and an odd sound of breathing, all I could hear were the faint noises of traffic outside. As I glanced up in dread, I saw a head on top of me peeking into the bottom bed at me from over the edge of the top bunk. He hung upside down, his medium to longish black hair hanging with gravity under the top of his head. There aren't enough words to adequately convey the horrifying sight. He sat up in the top bunk and continued to stare at me as I yelled and fell off the bed as soon as I recognized what I was witnessing. He started to giggle as I tossed something at him and said, "What are you doing?" As I watched him, I quickly switched on the light and made sure nothing had been stolen from my possessions. I turned to look at him when I heard the camera on my phone click. I was unsure if he was being spiteful or if he was mentally ill, so I packed my things and went straight to the front desk to request a new room, one of the few private ones. But he refused to move. He was holding his phone up to me, clearly taking a picture of me, and he was still laughing as he looked at me. I tried to negotiate a lower fee and stated why, and he said he would check on the room with the other guests. I left a review of the hostel but didn't call the police since I wasn't sure if any laws had been broken. The rest of my holiday there went well, and I enjoyed the woman I was seeing. But every time I went back to the hostel, I was afraid I might run across that strange guy again. I didn't like the picture of myself on that weirdo's phone. Although I'm not physically fit, I wish I had been in that situation. I've lived in a few hostels when traveling alone in order to make new friends and to save money. He started to chuckle this strange, unsettling laugh as I hurled something at him and cried, "What the F are you doing?" As I watched him, I quickly switched on the light and looked about to make sure nothing had been taken. I turned to look at him when I heard the camera on my phone click. He continued to giggle as he gazed at me while bringing his phone up to me, clearly snapping a photo of me. I packed my things and went straight to the front desk to request a new room, one of the few private ones, since I wasn't sure whether he was being spiteful or if he was mentally ill, but he refused to move. He claimed he would check on the room with the other guests after I explained why and attempted to bargain for a cheaper price. Since I wasn't sure whether any laws had been violated, I didn't contact the police, but I did leave a review of the hostel. I liked the lady I was seeing, and the remainder of my vacation there went well, but I was terrified of running across that weird man whenever I returned to the hostel. The photo of myself on that weirdo's phone didn't appeal to me. Although I'm not physically fit, I wish I was in such circumstance. I travel alone and have stayed in several hostels to meet interesting new people and save money. I've been in maybe 20 hostels in my life, and 90% of the time I've had good experiences. Before I begin, however, I would want to make it clear that the hostel was not solely to blame for my awful experience. Rome is home to the Freedom Traveler Hostel, but it was there that I had my first really unpleasant experience. I was completely unprepared for Rome since it was my first visit, and I had to depend on locals and Google Maps to help me navigate the city. There were no signs outside the hostel, so I even had problems locating it. However, after I found it, I walked via the big brown doors and was greeted by a kind lady who worked the front desk. I had previously booked a 4-person room with 2 single beds and a bunk bed. It was not the biggest room, but it had a green motif. I was thankful for the woman's help, and she was smiling the whole time. I wasn't happy or confident with the location she gave me for storing my bags, which turned out to be a shed in the rear yard area. I didn't mind the worker telling me that there weren't many people staying at the hostel right now, if it meant I would have more privacy in my room. After changing and placing my luggage under the bottom bunk bed, I decided to leave them in the room since I was exhausted after a busy day of traveling, and I hadn't packed anything too costly. Just as I was ready to doze off, there was a tap on the door. Even though I was in the midst of a snooze, I could tell that the 2 young guys who came had heavy Italian accents and were polite. I started talking to them when they identified themselves as the Marco and Lucio brothers. I could see how similar their appearances were, and Lucio was maybe 5'11", but not a toothpick either. Given his size, Marco must have been approximately 6'4". They were both in their early 20s, but their hairlines were receding and they were both very tanned. Although they weren't the most amiable-looking men, they first seemed to be okay. The 2 brothers started conversing among themselves in Italian after we were acquainted in English, but they were unaware that I understood them since I could tell they were teasing and discussing me. Marco called me a stupid white lad, and I heard it. At that moment I could have answered in Italian, but I want to keep it seeming like I didn't know the language. I now noticed that Lucio was laughing and waving at me as the 2 brothers gradually got out of bed and exited the room. I believed they had left their luggage in the storage shed in the garden area since they were not in the room. In addition to meeting other friendly visitors who were also spending the weekend there, I spent some time in the garden area, mingling with some of the locals. I decided to tour the city and made my way to the city center after a few hours and 2 dinner breaks. I assumed there might be some people socializing in the lounge area or back garden when I returned to the hostel, but there was no one around. Since it was 9 p.m., I made the decision to go to bed early, although I can't remember precisely when I fell asleep. The room was still dark when I woke up, but I could hear the brothers whispering back to me. I remained still while they conversed in Italian. In a whisper, one of them murmured something that roughly sounded like, "Just grab it, or are you going to do it?" I sensed it, but I didn't know what it meant. I waited for the sound of my luggage being moved before letting them know I was awake since they were talking about it. I swiped it away and screamed instead when I felt a cool, damp towel on my face that smelled good. I turned to see one of the brothers standing over me and cried, "What are you doing?" He hopped on the bottom bed with me and tried to dominate me, but I pushed him away and screamed for help. I couldn't tell which one it was. When the other brother pulled him away from me, the two men walked out of the room. I quickly grabbed my bag and shoes and rushed to the front desk to ask for help. There was no evidence that the two guys were ever there, but the man there said he saw them leave. In an effort to steal hostel visitors, two unnamed locals tried to virtually chloroform me. Although security has subsequently been tightened, anybody could have entered during my visit, and if I hadn't been awake, I would have been chloroformed and had my whole bag taken. I thus started to use more caution when it came to hostels. My friend Mia would go to Miami Beach with her partner to escape the cold, while I would go alone to the Art Basel. I wasn't going to remain with them, but I would meet up with them. The Bikini Hostel, which is in the heart of Miami Beach and is packed, there were even some people in the check-in lobby, was my choice since hotels and Airbnbs in Miami can be pricey, particularly if you're traveling alone. The majority of the passengers were in their 20s, so it felt younger, while some seemed to be traveling in groups and some, like myself, were traveling alone. Even though the hostel was merely meant to be a place for me to sleep, I didn't spend much time there since I could go the whole day without worrying because it had lockers where I could put my things. I didn't really mind being the only woman in a dorm with both men and women until that first night when I returned and got to know some of the other visitors. I thought I had left my phone on the bed when I woke up the next morning, so I immediately went to get it. I checked the whole room, but it was obviously taken, so I started asking around to see if anybody else had it. When I asked the man on the bed next to me to dial my number so we could hear it ring, I wondered whether I had brought it back to the room. But nobody did. I used the same guy's phone to ask him to meet me at the brunch spot we had scheduled when I contacted my buddy Mia to let her know I had misplaced my own phone. I gave the front desk one final look around the room and told them to call me his number. If anybody is interested in getting back my phone, I went to meet Mia at this location on Collins Avenue so we could have brunch together. I used Mia's phone to access iCloud and searched for my iPhone there. The last known location was at the hostel 2 hours ago, which somewhat reassured me since I may have left it in my luggage, the locker, or someplace else. We returned to the hostel together and searched the whole place, including the locker and my bag, but we were unable to locate anything. Even though it made no sense at all, I couldn't let this ruin my vacation, so we went to the convention center, the location of the Art Basel, a few hours later. After leaving, we went to a few bars and had an early dinner or late lunch. When I checked the location of Mia's phone, I saw that my iPhone had moved and was almost directly above us. When Mia and her partner joked that I was certain I didn't have my phone with me, I told them so. I looked for anybody who may be in possession of it, but what exactly would I search for? Now that I knew someone had my phone, I put it in lost mode. "Did anyone find a lost phone?" exclaimed Mia's amorous companion. Everyone stared at us, and although some fled, no one set out. We must have tried several times to call my phone, but no one answered, so I returned to the hostel. When it became dark outside so I could change, I was beginning to come to terms with the possibility that I would not get my phone back, but I felt like this strange-looking person was following me all the way back. He followed me everywhere, so I assumed he may be following me when I returned to the room, even though I don't believe he realized I was observing him. Before changing, I used my laptop to look for my iPhone again and then headed back to the hostel. To let her know when I was prepared to meet them, I set up doming Mia on Instagram on my laptop. I was overjoyed because I thought they would return it. But when I checked the front desk, I saw nothing. I kept asking, but nobody in the hostel had it, or at least they weren't admitting to it. I returned to the hotel and changed into more suitable clothes for a night out after taking a brief shower. Despite the fact that there were 2 other men there in the room at the moment, I had a terrifying idea and immediately persuaded Mia to call my phone. She said, "Okay," and then I heard a phone ringing in a pocket or on a bed. I looked up at the guy and he looked back at me suspiciously, as if he knew, and that told me everything. I was shocked to see the man I thought was pursuing me sitting on one of the mattresses and using his phone. I said, "Give me my phone," with the words, "I got you," to him. As the other 2 men in the room assisted me, I insisted that he take my phone out of his pockets. After listening, he produced a phone, which was indeed mine. I removed it from his hand and told the other 2 guys that he had been after me all day and was deliberately not giving it back, maybe when I was asleep. The guy quickly left the premises with his bag in hand and never came back. The 2 individuals that helped me, Mark and Paolo, became friends with me. I'm glad they were there because I wonder what would have occurred if they hadn't. I also advise keeping your phone and belongings in a fairly secure location and just focusing on the people around you if you ever stay in a hostel.